Think about the Roman Empire for a second. I mean, this was a superpower that stretched from the chilly shores of Britain all the way to the deserts of Mesopotamia. They conquered Gauls, Greeks, Egyptians, you name it. And yet, there was this one place where its legendary legions hit an absolute brick wall: the dark, dense forests of Germania. So what happened? Why couldn't the greatest empire in the ancient world conquer this one territory?
And listen to this. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing almost a century after the fact, just nails the feeling of dread and, frankly, respect the Germanic peoples commanded. This wasn't just another tough campaign for the Romans. No, Germania was the place that taught them brutal, unforgettable lessons, and literally swallowed entire armies whole. That's the big historical puzzle we're going to unpack right now. It's this incredible story of logistics, of military strategy, and a massive clash of cultures. And it all starts with a really simple but kind of brutal calculation. Okay, so the first major reason really boils down to a cost-benefit analysis. For Rome, conquering any new territory had to be worth the price in blood and treasure. And when they looked at Germania, well, the math just wasn't mathing. You have to understand how the Romans saw Germania. This is so key. Roman writers like Tacitus, they didn't just describe a foreign country. They painted this picture of a totally alien world, a savage, untamed backwater filled with endless bogs and dark forests. This wasn't just geography, you see. It was basically propaganda that framed the whole idea of conquering it as deeply unappealing from the very beginning. And the cost of even trying to operate in this world was just staggering. I mean, let's take just one of Tiberius's expeditions, back in 4 AD. He marched into Germania with a force this large. Think about that for a second. That is a massive commitment of manpower for just a single campaign. But here's where it gets really nuts. Supplying that army. They needed this much food and animal fodder every single day. We always think about the Roman legion's swords, but their real strength? It was logistics. And in a land with no real roads and just endless forest, those supply lines were an absolute nightmare just waiting to happen.
So when you put it all together, the calculation was pretty simple, right? The costs, both financial and in manpower, were astronomical. The supply lines were long and incredibly vulnerable. And for what? What was the prize? It didn't seem like there was much wealth or taxable land. So when you compared it to rich territories in the east, like Parthia, yeah, Germania just looks like a terrible investment.
But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Rome was willing to pay that insane price. There was another, even bigger problem. Militarily, Germania was a quagmire where the traditional Roman way of war just, well, it completely fell apart. Just think about how Caesar conquered Gaul. He could target major strongholds, right? Take a big city like Alesia and boom, you break the rebellion. But Germania was totally different. It was a land of small, independent tribes with no strategic centers. There was no capital city to lay siege to, no single army you could meet on the field for one decisive battle. It was just an endless, incredibly frustrating guerrilla war. And this led to more than a century of pure frustration. You have the absolute catastrophe at Teutoburg Forest, where 3 entire legions were just wiped off the map. Then you get Germanicus's revenge campaigns, which won some battles but didn't actually secure any territory. Then, fast forward 150 years later, and you've got the bloody Marcomannic Wars, which just end in a stalemate. You see the pattern here, right? Rome could win battles, but it could never win the war. These repeated losses did more than just cost men and money. They shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. Back in Rome, an emperor built his entire reputation on victories. Disasters like Teutoburg created political instability and this deep-seated fear of overextending the empire's borders. Before long, the political will to even try to conquer Germania just, poof, it evaporated. All right, so there's one last piece to this puzzle, and it might be the deepest one of all. Even if Rome could have conquered Germania, could they have actually Romanized it? The cultural gap was just way, way too wide to bridge. I mean, look at these differences. They were fundamental. Roman law was written down, universal. Germanic law was oral and communal. The Roman military was this strict, professional hierarchy. Germanic warriors followed leaders based on personal charisma and bravery. Roman society was urban and imperial. Germanic society was tribal and fiercely autonomous. They were quite literally 2 different worlds. And the Germanic tribes actively resisted being assimilated. They kept using their own runic scripts instead of adopting Latin. And get this, in a fascinating reversal,
Some Roman soldiers stationed on the frontier actually started worshiping local Germanic gods. The Romans realized pretty quickly that trying to impose their culture was just futile. Alliances and trade were simply more effective tools than trying to conquer them. So, in the end, Rome did what any smart superpower does when it hits a wall. They made a pragmatic choice. They accepted that Germania was unconquerable, and they shifted their entire strategy to one of containment. They fortified the Rhine River, they played tribes off against each other, and they basically managed their difficult neighbors from a distance. They learned to live with the border they simply couldn't move.
And this leaves us with a profound, kind of mind-blowing final thought. If Rome had conquered Germania, would England, France, or Germany even exist as we know them today? Think about it. That failure to conquer allowed Germanic peoples like the Franks, the Angles, and the Saxons to develop on their own. Centuries later, they would be the ones to conquer parts of the former Roman Empire, eventually giving rise to modern nations. Rome's greatest failure may just be one of its most consequential legacies.